Lossie Mouth. Seaside town and home to around 8,000 people. Protected from the sea by stone sea walls and a glorious sandy dune, accessible via a single bridge.
This is a video about the Lossie Bridge and the involvement of the town's Community Development Trust. The Development Trust was formed in late 2014 and early in 2015 a 5-year plan was put together following consultation with the local community. At the top of the agenda on that plan was the East Beach Bridge, which at that time was in a poor state and had had no maintenance for the previous 20 years. And so the Trust set about trying to establish the true structural condition of the bridge, and also at the same time to actually find out who owned the bridge and what they might be responsible for. At no time in those early days did we realise that some years later we would be involved in a major project which would see the replacement of the bridge. And this is that story.
Who owns this? You'd think it would be a simple enough question to answer when it comes to something as important as a bridge. But the Trust were to find this was quite a conundrum.
Now, one of the things that the community really wanted the Development Trust to look at was, first of all, the question of the ownership of the bridge, and secondly, how the bridge could be upgraded and safeguarded for the future. My role in all of this, and that's with a lot of help from many other people, was as a solicitor in my day job. I spent some time on behalf of the Trust trying to find out who was the owner of the bridge and what the consequences of the bridge having an owner or not would be. The original bridge was from the Esplanade to the west end of the East Beach. That was built in 1908. It was then moved in 1918 to its present location at Seatown. This is because the Esplanade Bridge was restricting access for boats to the harbour area upstream of the bridge. The bridge was owned by a company called the Lossiemouth Old Harbour Commissioners. Now, as far as we know, that company ceased to exist sometime around the middle of the 20th century, and that's something that then became a bit of a problem for the ownership of the bridge later on. One of the things about ownerless property in Scotland is that it tends to fall into the ownership of the Crown, but it does so in such a way that the Crown doesn't really need to do anything with it if it doesn't want to. So over a period of about 18 months we had to negotiate with the person who looks after these things on behalf of the Crown, who's called the Queen's and Lord Treasurer's Remembrancer. And at the end of that period of time, during which we had to locate various documents from public records and the National Library of Scotland, they did agree that the land in question had fallen into the ownership of the Crown. The Crown didn't want it, and so the Crown then issued on the 3rd of October 2017 a notice of disclaimer of ownership.
And so, with no owner in sight, the question of who would own and maintain the bridge became intrinsically linked to the question of who would pay for this.
When the Trust first got involved in the bridge project, we thought that all we had to do was to discover who owned the bridge and then counsel them as to what they could do to repair it and gain access again. But as you've just heard, nobody owns the bridge. We had to lobby politicians for funding. Our own local councils were very supportive, as was our MSP. But we had to find the money and the finance to do that, which couldn't be found just from the public itself. So we carried out a lot of work to try and make sure that funding could be put in place to gain access again to the East Beach. Having discovered then that nobody owned the bridge, we had to somehow see, could we fix the current bridge? And we had surveys done to see if that would be at all possible. The surveys that came back told us that the parapet of the bridge was in very poor repair and would have to at least be repaired in full. The snag with that was that the wood that supported it was 100 years old, so you would end up with a new bridge on top of some wood which we didn't know fully the condition of, particularly the bit that goes into the water. And so nobody would actually fund us to just put a parapet on the top, and we also wouldn't have got a licence to do that for the bridge. So now we knew that the bridge would have to be replaced, and we had to look at what options could be available and what funding would be available to achieve this. We eventually found out that there was going to be 3 options. One was to replace the current bridge in the same position. There was a second option just slightly downstream, and the third option was to actually rebuild the bridge and provide access from the esplanade, which is where the bridge had been originally in 1908. Funding was always going to be the primary issue. Where could we get funding? And before the bridge was closed, it was proving to be very difficult. The argument was, the bridge is open, why are you worried about it? But we knew that the bridge was in a very poor state of repair. Strangely enough, the day the bridge closed, the funding stream to a degree opened up and interest increased dramatically within the town and beyond that, when people realised that first of all the bridge was closed, access would be lost, and there was no concept of the bridge being opened anytime soon. And as you know, it's now been closed for coming up for 3 years. It was the Trust's job therefore to go and try and find somebody who would give us the funding and build us a bridge which we thought merited the status that the current bridge has. Now, we were told by the Scottish Government, who were funding the project, that the bridge had to be best value. What that meant was basically the shorter the span, the less the cost. And unfortunately, this old bridge is a third longer than it would be to build it from the esplanade, and hence the costs involved would have been at least 1/3 more. With the option of being best value being the only one on the table, then it was decided to build the bridge from the esplanade. The Trust's journey has been a long one, in excess of 5 years, taking over from some work done by a variety of other groups and individuals. We had decided that all we thought we had to do was find out what was wrong with the bridge and get somebody to repair it, but that wasn't really going to be the case, as you've found out.
Thanks to the dedicated commitment of local people, the residents of Lossiemouth can now look forward to returning to the East Beach.
So that's our short story about where we got to today, which is seeing the foundations of a new bridge being built between the town's esplanade and the East Beach. You can actually see the work going on behind me at the moment. We do plan to make a second video when the bridge has been completed, and we hope that you'll join us then for part 2.